Welcome to the shadowy corners of the darkness, where the unexplainable lurks, waiting to share its haunting tales. Tonight, let us step into a haunted house, a place where eerie noises and ghostly figures have robbed its inhabitants of any sense of safety. Imagine yourself home alone, the unsettling sounds echoing from the kitchen, like silverware clattering in the drawers. One fateful night, you suddenly awaken, your heart racing, only to realize something is watching you from the shadows. You hear the sorrowful cries of a young girl, heavy footsteps approaching, as if an unseen entity is poised to strike. These are not just sounds. They are memories, restless spirits yearning to unveil the horrific secrets they bear. Are you ready to listen to this story? Prepare yourself, for the darkness is waiting for you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we're venturing into haunted houses for a collection of scary stories. So buckle up, get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. This happened to me when I was home alone on several occasions. I heard silverware rattling in the drawer downstairs in the kitchen. One time, I snuck downstairs and slowly crept to the kitchen door. The silverware continued to clank, and just as I began to peek into the kitchen, I heard the drawer slam shut. Yet no one was there. One day, my friend Sarah brought her keyboard to our house, set it up in the family room, and started playing Christmas tunes. After a song or two, the temperature in the room dropped considerably, and my border collie looked up at the ceiling with a "it's great to see you" expression on his face. My dad and I were sitting in the family room watching TV when we saw the shadowy silhouette of a woman slowly move from left to right across the wall above the fireplace. One night, my dad woke up to use the bathroom. When he stepped out, he heard the voice of a young girl cry out, "Mama." I had fallen asleep on the family sofa for half an hour, only to wake up and find the floor strewn with popcorn, which we always kept in the kitchen pantry. On another occasion, my dad woke up in the night and noticed my mom across the room, looking out the window. He was just about to speak to her when he felt my actual mom stir next to him in bed. He pulled the blankets over his head and finally went back to sleep. We lived in New Jersey on a property that had been occupied by a family-run tavern in the early 1800s. We've never felt threatened, but it has certainly been spooky from time to time. I'm pretty sure the house I grew up in was haunted. One time, when I was 13, it was around 10 a.m. in the summer, and my family had gone to the shop. I went to the bathroom and heard really heavy footsteps, like a big guy in boots, slowly climbing the stairs toward me. Terrified, I shouted, "Hello?" As soon as I did, the footsteps turned around without changing pace and went back down the stairs, into my parents' room. I remember jumping off the toilet and running downstairs. I could hear the footsteps above me, and in the front room, it sounded like someone was messing with the plugs. I can't recall how long it took for the noise to stop, but it felt like an eternity. On another occasion, I was home alone when all the kitchen cupboards started opening and slamming shut really loudly. My dog refused to go downstairs, so I chickened out and stayed in my room until my parents got home. At first, I thought they were home, but when I checked out the window, their car wasn't there. Every time I ventured down the stairs, I felt a creepy presence, as if someone was looming over me. I had this vivid image of a tall, broad guy with his hands on my shoulders, about to push me. I used to think it was just my fear of falling down the stairs, but since we moved, I've never had that feeling again. I mentioned it to my sister and my dad, and they both said they had felt it too. There was also a time when my bed started violently shaking, as if someone was hitting it. It was a bunk bed with a desk underneath, and it was moving a lot. I shouted for my mom, and it stopped when she came upstairs. She calmed me down and told me it was just the pipes under the floor. Now, she laughs and says she had no clue what to say, so she just blamed it on the pipes. It honestly felt like someone was hitting the leg of my bed with a significant amount of force. Again, I can't remember exactly what happened after, but it must have stopped quickly. My sister and mom also have stories from that house, and my dad, who generally doesn't believe in these things, also agrees that the house was haunted, especially the stairs, though he refuses to share what exactly happened to him. When I was about 18, I had moved out of my parents' house. Coincidentally, my friend moved into the house next door to my mom. He often hosted house parties on the weekends, and one night, as the party was winding down, I found myself with nowhere to sleep. I decided to crash at my mom's house. Since no one was home, I let myself in with my set of keys and settled into one of the rooms. After about 10 minutes, I could hear someone breathing at the end of the bed. I was very drunk and decided to ignore it. The next day, when my family came home, I told them how intoxicated I was and mentioned that it sounded like someone was breathing in the next room. However, I didn't disclose where the sound was coming from. My mom relayed that she had heard it too and had a medium check the room. The medium confirmed that there was an old man at the end of the bed. He wasn't sinister. He just enjoyed relaxing in that particular spot. We later bought a house where the original owner had suffered a stroke in our bedroom. He remained alive for about a year in the hospital and passed away a few months before we obtained ownership. It was quite a process getting the house, but that's another story. In the first few nights, we experienced some strange occurrences, but I chalked it up to being new homeowners not yet used to our surroundings. I woke up twice feeling like I was talking to someone. One morning, my husband got up to go to work, closed our door, and headed into the kitchen. My dogs were in the mudroom, and I was sure I heard him let them out. I could hear the tick, tick, tick of their nails hitting the floor as they came down the hallway. Then I heard a growl, which startled me awake. I opened my eyes to find the hallway lights off and the dogs standing in the mudroom. About a week later, I went to my morning job, and when I came home, I smelled floral perfume. My first thought was that the previous owner's daughter must have come into our house. So, I called my husband and told him to buy new locks because I was pretty sure someone was in our home. "Someone came in without asking," he replied. I smelled that when I went to work at 5 a.m. I froze because I never smelled it when I left for work, which was around 8 a.m. He suggested it was probably my laundry detergent, but I don't buy floral detergent, and it doesn't smell like that. As the years went by, small things continued to happen. I'd hear bangs and knocking, and I'd see shadows from the corner of my eye. One winter, I even had our kitchen window open, and my dog was pushed off the couch, refusing to go back up. Outside, a door would constantly be left open, which drove me nuts. One day it would be the shop, another day it would be the barn, and then it would be in the garage. I always have a habit of double-checking doors to make sure they're closed. Recently, I woke up to find our office door open. I usually keep it closed because I need darkness when I sleep, and we don't have proper curtains, so the light just shines in. I also smudged the house, and things have quieted down significantly. However, my husband and I are going through a divorce, and after meeting another guy and starting to date him, strange things began happening there too. I smudged that place as well, but now things are happening outside. I'm pretty convinced that either he or I are cursed. My old house about 2 houses ago was haunted. My husband is in the military and often leaves for weeks or months at a time. At one point, he was TDY for about 3 weeks. After tucking our girls in, I went to bed and read for a bit, making sure they were asleep. I then got back in bed, pulled the blankets up, snuggled in, and felt my husband crawl into bed next to me, hugging me in a way that felt filled with love and protection. One of those hugs that are just the best kind. In bed, I felt so safe, warm, and loved, and I sort of basked in the hug for a moment until it hit me that no one was in the room with me. I didn't get freaked out because it wasn't scary. Another thing that would happen was that I'd sometimes see a little girl in a white frilly dress out of the corner of my eye, but only when my husband was gone, never when he was home. My girls had instances too. They both played with the girl, but neither told each other about it. Nor did my husband or I, not until years later. My youngest asked me about the blonde neighbor girl we had, who always wore a white dress when she was 3, 4, and 5 while we lived in that home. I recalled, yeah, what was her name? She played with her a lot before bedtime, and then she would leave. When we moved from the house, I accidentally left my pillow there, and haunted. I ran back to get my pillow. I went upstairs, grabbed it, and then paused on the landing of the stairs. I stood there for a moment, saying goodbye to the house because you could really feel its presence. Seconds later, I felt like something wanted to push me down the stairs, so I booked it out of there. I didn't mention anything to anyone because I figured I was just going a tad crazy. A week later, my husband went to take out all the garbage and stopped on the landing. He did the same thing, saying goodbye and expressing gratitude for the house. Then he felt like he was going to get pushed down the stairs too. When he got home, he told me, not caring if he seemed crazy or not. That's when we started talking about all the weird stuff that would happen, but we never connected it to being haunted. There were other little things, like the overwhelming feeling of dread we felt when going into the basement at night. We took to doing laundry only during the day. Our cats would stare at spots that had nothing in them and puff for no reason. Overall, it wasn't a bad house. We loved living there, but we eventually moved due to horrible neighbors who ruined the neighborhood with parties every night and loud fights. It wasn't the best environment for raising children. My best friend's house, back when we were growing up, was haunted in my humble opinion. He lived in a 100-year-old farmhouse out in the country, but they all treated it like the haunting was completely normal. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal, and since my friend was always good at pranking and duping me, I wasn't buying it when he told me it was haunted. He shared some of the commonplace things that would happen to him and his family, like objects moving randomly, cabinets and doors opening unassisted. The feeling that someone was just on the edge of your peripheral vision, but when you turned to look, no one was there, and inexplicable cold breezes when the windows weren't open. I experienced a few things like that when we hung out there, but they were easy to dismiss as something explainable, so I didn't fully believe the house was haunted. A guest room. It's a cozy space filled with furniture and memories, but there's an undeniable weight to it. I didn't mind hanging out at my friend's house, but there was an odd vibe I really can't describe. Since I was skeptical, I wanted to throw him under the bus and got brave enough one time to ask his mom about the hauntings right in front of him. I thought she would downplay it or tell me he was full of BS, but she just shrugged it off and said they had all gotten used to the occurrences and that they were harmless. Honestly, it wasn't the response I expected, but it did make me a little less skeptical after that. I finally accepted that the hauntings were real. One of the last times I stayed the night before they moved, I remember the kitchen had a door with a hook latch that led down to the basement/crawl space where they kept all their pickled and canned goods. The house was old, so the wall that the door was on had a noticeable lean, meaning the door could only rest in the shut position or would swing completely open against the wall. If you held it straight out, it would either slam shut or bang against the wall. It was late one night, and we were up playing Halo on the Xbox after his parents had gone to bed. In the midst of playing, he stopped and said, "Look, look," while nodding towards the kitchen. I could finally hear the latch come undone and turn my head just in time to watch the basement door slowly open past the midpoint and then slam against the wall as if someone had just let go. It didn't faze my friend in the least. He just got right back into the game. Since I was immersed in the game, I didn't take the time to acknowledge what had just happened. That night, I went upstairs to sleep, lying awake and trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. Partly, I was trying to think of a logical explanation, and partly I was scared because I'd never seen anything like that before. That was back when we were in school, and now we're in our mid-30s. I attend a research university and pride myself on being a critical thinker, trusting empirical knowledge and making sense of the world around me with an evidence-based approach. Yet, to this day, I can't explain how that door opened without the assistance of something. I know it was just a door opening 20 years ago. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of paranormal videos showing doors opening inexplicably, and I largely have a hard time believing them. But when I think about my experience, I'm convinced that something paranormal made it happen. I now live in the house I grew up in. I inherited it after my grandfather died upstairs in one of the 2 bedrooms, which is now a guest room. It's a cozy space filled with furniture and memories, but there's an undeniable weight to it. Position, as if it had never left. This feeling is bizarre, as if some invisible force is toying with me, making me feel like I'm living in a horror movie. There are nights when everyone has gone to bed, and I find myself sitting in the kitchen, hearing strange sounds from upstairs. Sometimes it's light footsteps, other times it's whispers. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind or the normal sounds of an old house. But deep down in my mind, there's a part one can't deny, that something is going on. As time passed, I noticed these spikes of activity seemed to have their own cycles. When I spent more time in the house, especially during moments of loneliness or sadness, the strange occurrences became more pronounced. It was as if my energy was stimulating the presence of the lingering spirits. On some nights, I felt as though I was being watched, not by any specific entity, but by the memories and sorrows of those who had lived here before me. One time, while I was cooking dinner, The overhead light began to flicker. I tried adjusting the bulb, but to no avail. Fear washed over me, but at the same time, I felt a strange connection to the house. It seemed to be telling me something. I relaxed, deciding to accept that these things were part of life, part of the presence of those who had passed on. I started keeping a journal of these odd occurrences. My notes weren't just to track what was happening. They were also to help me understand the house and the people who had lived here. Every line I wrote was an effort to connect with the memories, the untold stories, and the wandering souls around me. Over time, I realized that instead of fearing these events, I could learn from them. The house wasn't just a place to live. It was a treasure trove of memories, sorrows, and mysteries that I needed to explore. Perhaps these strange phenomena weren't disturbances but reminders of the past, of the people I had loved and the memories I needed to preserve. Your headboard. I began to feel a growing unease in the house, but I kept trying to rationalize everything. The kitchen items disappearing, the static sounds, and even the flickering lights. Each event felt like a breadcrumb leading me deeper into the mystery of this old home. Then came the night that changed everything. I had just finished dinner and was tidying up in the kitchen. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. As I washed the dishes, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the staircase. It was so loud and clear that I dropped a plate, sending it shattering to the floor. My heart raced as I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But there was no response, only silence. I decided to gather my courage and investigate. I went upstairs, the hairs on my neck standing on end. As I reached the landing, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. It was as if the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. I stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling, but something felt wrong. I quickly retreated back downstairs, feeling as if someone, or something, was watching me. A few nights later, while lying in bed with my fiancée, I was jolted awake by a loud crash coming from the kitchen. We both jumped up and rushed to see what had happened. To our surprise, the cabinet doors were flung open and several pots and pans had been thrown to the floor. We looked at each other in disbelief, our hearts pounding. This was unlike anything we had experienced before. In the following weeks, the activity intensified. My fiancé began to feel uneasy in the house, especially in the glamour room. He claimed he felt a presence in there, as if someone were watching him while he was trying to relax. I started to wonder if my father's energy was indeed trapped in the house. But what about the other spirits? I felt as though there were multiple entities sharing this space with me. One particularly chilling event happened late one night. We were both in bed, the lights dimmed, and I had just started to drift off to sleep when I heard my name being called. It was a soft whisper, almost a sigh, but it was undeniably my name. I shot upright in bed, heart racing, and turned to my fiancé, who looked equally startled. "Did you hear that?" I asked, and he nodded, eyes wide. After that night, I decided to take action. I reached out to a local paranormal group, hoping they could shed light on the activity in my house. They scheduled a visit and brought their equipment to investigate. I was nervous yet excited, eager to see what they might uncover. When they arrived, they set up cameras and audio recorders in various rooms, including the glamour room and the dining room where my father had passed. They encouraged me to share my experiences and any specific locations where I felt the energy was strongest. As the night wore on, they began their investigation. I watched as they interacted with what they claimed were spirits in the house, using various tools to communicate. At one point, the temperature dropped dramatically in the dining room, and the investigators seemed thrilled, claiming they had made contact with my father. It was a surreal experience, and though I wanted to believe, I struggled with my skepticism. The night ended with them capturing some unusual sounds on their recordings, but they promised to review the evidence and get back to me. After they left, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Perhaps I could finally understand the strange occurrences in my home and find a way to coexist peacefully with the spirits that seemed to linger. But the question remained, who were they, and what were they trying to communicate? But the way it happened felt significant to me. The organizer had been stable for months, and there was no reason for it to suddenly fall off the shelf. We both jumped up from our beds, startled by the noise. I rushed to the pantry to see what had happened. There it was, lying on the floor, all the medication scattered around. It didn't feel like a simple accident. It felt deliberate, as if something wanted to get my attention. My fiancé and I began picking everything up, exchanging bewildered glances. "What the hell just happened?" he asked, and I could only shake my head in response. That morning, I inspected the pantry thoroughly. I checked the shelf, the organizer, and even the other items on the shelf to see if something could have caused it to topple. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I felt a mix of frustration and fear. Was I really living in a haunted house? Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe I was just being paranoid, or perhaps it was the stress of the renovations and adjusting to a new life with my fiancé. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The activity was too consistent, too eerie to dismiss as coincidence. Then, I started to document everything. I kept a journal by my bed and made a note of every strange occurrence, every sound, and every feeling of unease. It became almost therapeutic, a way to process what was happening in my life. I would jot down the dates and times, hoping to find a pattern in the chaos. As I continued documenting, I realized there seemed to be cycles. The smaller events would build up over a few weeks, culminating in a major incident, and then everything would go quiet for months. It was like the house had its own rhythm, one I was slowly beginning to understand. After a particularly unsettling week, when the footsteps and the phone notifications seemed to intensify, I reached out to the paranormal group again. They agreed to come back for another investigation, and I was eager to share my journal with them. During their visit, I felt a mix of hope and anxiety. Would they find something? Would they be able to communicate with whatever was haunting my home? I wanted answers, but I was also terrified of what those answers might be. That night, they set up their equipment again, and we began the investigation. As they walked through the house, asking questions and using various devices to try to make contact, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Suddenly, while we were gathered in the living room, one of the investigators pointed toward the glamour room. "I'm getting a strong energy from that room," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I think someone is trying to communicate with you." I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart raced as I recalled all the strange occurrences associated with that space. The footsteps, the phone notifications, the feeling of being watched. The investigator asked me to share my experiences, and as I recounted the incidents, I noticed the lights in the living room flickering. "Is that normal?" I asked, glancing at the others. They shook their heads, their expressions serious. "Let's try an experiment," the investigator suggested. She had me sit in a chair while she held a device that looked like a small speaker. "I want you to speak to the energy in this room. Ask it questions. Let it know you're here and willing to listen." With my heart pounding, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I asked about my father, about the strange noises and occurrences. I felt a sudden rush of warmth, as if the room had come alive with energy. As I spoke, the device began to emit a series of beeps and clicks. The investigator's eyes widened in surprise. "We're getting responses," she said, excitement filling her voice. I felt a mix of disbelief and fear. What was happening? In that moment, I realized I wasn't just dealing with the remnants of my father's energy. There were other spirits here, too, each with their own stories and reasons for lingering. It was overwhelming, and I struggled to process it all. As the night went on, we continued the session, and I found myself feeling a strange sense of relief. Perhaps acknowledging their presence was the first step toward finding peace, not just for me, but for them as well. By the time the investigators packed up their equipment, I felt a sense of closure. They promised to review the recordings and get back to me with their findings. As they left, I couldn't help but feel a newfound hope. Maybe I could coexist with the spirits in my home, understanding their presence rather than fearing it. Little did I know, the journey had only just begun, and the house still held many secrets waiting to be uncovered. And a finished basement. My boss and I exchanged glances, both of us puzzled, because we were the only ones in the house. We shrugged it off, assuming maybe it was the wind or something, but the footsteps continued. They sounded like they were coming closer, moving toward us, but there was no one there. Feeling a bit uneasy, we decided to investigate. We followed the sounds into the hallway, but the house was empty. I checked the garage, thinking someone might have come in, but the door was locked and no cars were in the driveway. We went back to work, trying to shake off the weird feeling. A few minutes later, we heard the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping across the floor in the dining room. My boss looked at me, eyes wide, and we both tiptoed back to the dining room. The chairs were all in place, just as we had left them. I felt a chill run down my spine. After a bit of silence, we continued working, but the feeling of being watched lingered. It was as if someone, or something, was keeping tabs on us. At one point, I felt a light touch on my shoulder, and I turned around, expecting to see my boss behind me, but he was on the other side of the room. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. Later that day, as we were finishing up, we decided to explore the basement since we hadn't been down there yet. The stairs creaked ominously as we descended, and the air grew colder. The basement was mostly unfinished, filled with boxes and old furniture covered in dust. As we moved deeper into the space, I noticed a small corner room that was partially closed off. Curiosity got the better of us, and we went in. It was cluttered with old toys, clothes, and what appeared to be a child's drawing on the wall. The drawing depicted a family, but there was something off about it. There was a shadowy figure standing behind the family, almost blending in with the wall. My stomach dropped as I felt the air shift, a heavy presence pressing down on us. Just then, the door behind us swung shut with a loud bang, and we jumped, our hearts racing. We rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we tugged and pushed, calling out for someone to help us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door swung open on its own, and we stumbled out, gasping for breath. We left the house as quickly as we could, and my boss said he had never felt so uneasy in his life. After that experience, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us from the shadows of that house. I didn't want to return, and I never did. It was a job that haunted me long after I left. Fast forward to a couple of years later, I was telling my friend about my experience, and he insisted we should drive by the house. When we arrived, I was shocked to see a "for sale" sign out front, and it looked even worse than I remembered. The windows were boarded up, and the lawn was overgrown. We got out of the car to take a closer look, and as we approached, we both felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, we heard a faint giggle, like that of a child, echoing from inside the house. My friend and I exchanged nervous glances, and without a word, we hopped back into the car and drove away, vowing never to return. The house is still there, sitting empty, a reminder of the strange happenings that took place within its walls. I often wonder what might still linger there, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon its secrets. Living with my grandparents for a time, I became convinced that their house was haunted. I often caught glimpses of a figure passing my doorway from the corner of my eye. I had a basement room, and a month into my stay, I initially thought the shadow was my grandpa. Then I remembered I was home alone. On other occasions, when my grandma was home, she claimed she hadn't been downstairs in days. I believed her. She began to avoid the stairs altogether, and the shadow always moved downwards, never up. My grandma was a heavy walker, always stomping about, yet the figure was silent. I started keeping my door closed, but one night, as I lay in bed with my sister, I planned to scare her by mimicking the eerie grudge noises from the doorway. Just as I was about to do so, the shadow passed again. We both sat up, startled. There was no one else around, so we rushed to the window to see if we could replicate the shadow's shape, but nothing worked. After that, we made sure to keep the door shut, yet it would open and close on its own. Often, I'd wake up to find it wide open, even though I'd closed it just before sleeping. One weekend, home alone, I heard a loud crash. Steeling myself, I crept upstairs to find a picture frame that had inexplicably fallen onto the floor, even though the notch on the back indicated it couldn't have just slipped off. The frame landed in the middle of the hallway, and I knew it hadn't been thrown. Despite the unsettling occurrences, the presence felt more playful than malicious. Living near the Kansas-Missouri border, my experience with an abandoned house forever changed my perspective on ghosts. The house, a pink two-story structure next to my father's, had a dark history, an incident where a mother hung her child out the window before taking her own life. For years, the house sat abandoned, locked in probate, with no one willing to buy it. Intrigued by tales of a bubonic plague connection, my friends and I ventured inside. At first, we found nothing out of the ordinary, but as I turned 14, my curiosity pushed me to explore upstairs for the first time. Letters littered the floor, many dating back to the 1980s, leading to a small closet. Despite our better judgment, we began breaking things for a laugh. That's when things took a strange turn. After smashing a doll, we heard something swing from a window, but nothing was there. We dismissed it, but weeks later, when we returned, the closet door creaked open, revealing the exact doll we had broken, completely intact. Confused, we checked the spot where we had shattered it, only to find no remnants, no shards, nothing. The closet door closed behind me when I went back to investigate, and the doll had vanished again. Terrified, we fled the house and didn't return for 3 months. When we did, I brought a new doll, hoping to see what would happen. It didn't react, but the old doll was still nowhere to be found. The house had succumbed to weather damage, but our curiosity led us back upstairs, where the ceiling had collapsed, leaving the closet ajar. As I crawled inside, I heard a child's voice, muffled and unclear, that seemed to say, "Do you want to play hide and seek?" The chill ran down my spine, and I never stepped foot in that house again. 15 years ago, while working for a small remodeling company, one job stood out. We were updating a large ranch home in an upscale St. Louis neighborhood. One afternoon, as my boss and I were working in the dining room, we distinctly heard the screen door in the garage swing open, followed by footsteps through the kitchen. My boss, thinking it was William arriving to choose paint colors for the bedrooms, called out his name as he moved toward the kitchen. But after checking the front door, he turned to me, puzzled. I hadn't seen anyone enter or leave the house, and we both felt a growing sense of unease. Deciding to take a break for lunch, we set up in the garage just as William pulled in. That was the first strange experience I had there. The second occurred while I was alone, stripping wallpaper in the breakfast nook. Suddenly, there were 3 loud bangs from the basement, vibrations shooting through the floor beneath me. Mocking the sound, I stomped my feet 3 times, only to be answered by 3 bangs from below. Tensing up, I made my way downstairs, only to find nothing but an empty, neat basement. I had always enjoyed working on unique homes with rich histories, but nothing prepared me for the eerie encounters this house had to offer. In 2001, I had just moved into a foster family that owned 2 old people's homes in Leeds and Yorkshire, one located on the boundary of the ancient Templar kingdom of Walsingham. After the residents were moved to care homes, we decided to spend the night to ensure everything was cleaned up before the sale. As we arrived, a bad feeling washed over me, like a thick, dark cloud loomed over the place. Ignoring the sensation, I helped my foster mother and her friend with chores until bedtime. I asked if I could sleep on the floor instead of being alone, and they agreed. As the banging continued, the sound of frantic footsteps echoed through the house, and Roderick's heart raced. He could hear the door handle rattling as whatever was outside tried to get in. "Stay quiet," he whispered to his sister, trying to keep his voice steady, though fear gnawed at him. The pounding on the door intensified, and he could feel the floorboards creaking beneath the weight of whatever was out there. Minutes felt like hours as they waited in terrified silence. Roderick's mind raced with possibilities. Was it just their imagination? A prank? Or something much more sinister? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the noise stopped. An eerie silence fell over the house, broken only by the sound of Roderick's heavy breathing. Just as he thought it might be safe, he heard a soft whisper coming from the other side of the door. It sounded like a child calling his name, but Roderick knew better than to respond. He held his sister close, reassuring her without words, but inside he felt a deep unease. After a while, the whispers faded into silence. Roderick summoned the courage to peer through the keyhole. To his shock, he saw nothing but darkness. Gathering his nerve, he slowly opened the door, ready to confront whatever had been haunting them. As he stepped into the hallway, the house felt unnaturally cold. He made his way cautiously to the kitchen, every creak of the floor sending chills down his spine. The room was empty, but something was off. The chairs were pushed back from the table as if someone had just been sitting there, and the lights flickered overhead. Suddenly, A loud crash echoed from behind him. Roderick spun around to see the back door swinging open violently, despite there being no wind. He rushed back to his sister's room, locking the door behind him once again. They spent the rest of the night huddled together, listening to the unsettling sounds that came from the rest of the house. It felt like a ghostly presence was toying with them, as if it enjoyed their fear. Finally, when dawn broke, the noises ceased, and the house returned to its normal stillness. Roderick's parents returned later that morning, blissfully unaware of the terror their children had endured. After that night, Roderick couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lingered in their home. He began to notice strange occurrences, objects moving, cold spots in certain rooms, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Despite their best efforts to ignore it, the family eventually decided to move. Roderick and his sister often wonder if the new occupants would experience the same terror they did, or if they would uncover the secrets that lay hidden within those walls. These tales, steeped in personal experience and eerie folklore, serve as chilling reminders of the unknown that lurks just out of sight. Whether they are merely the products of imagination or actual encounters with the supernatural, the fear they invoke remains very real. And so, these stories remind us that there are mysteries in life that we may never fully understand. We may never know what truly happened in those old houses or the places filled with memories. However, we can share, feel, and explore those fears together through each tale. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more intriguing tales, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you even more content. See you in the next video.